Fascism is War by Dimitrov. 2 years ago, in August 1935, the Seventh Congress of the Communist International, in analyzing the international situation and seeking ways and means whereby the working class could carry on the struggle against the offensive of fascism, pointed to the indissoluble connection between the struggle against fascism and the struggle for peace. Fascism is war, declared the Congress. Coming to power against the will and interests of its own countrymen, fascism seeks a way out of its growing domestic difficulties in aggression against other countries and peoples, in a new redivision of the globe by unleashing world war. As far as fascism is concerned, peace is certain ruin. The preservation of international peace renders it possible for the enslaved masses in the fascist countries to gather their forces together and to prepare for the overthrow of the hated fascist dictatorship, and to enable the international proletariat to win time for the establishment of unity in its ranks, to rally together the supporters of peace, and to establish an insurmountable barrier in the way of the outbreak of war. When the Seventh Congress characterized fascism as the firebrand of war, when it pointed to the growing danger of a new imperialist war, and to the need for establishing a powerful united fighting front against fascism, there were very few people, even in the labor movement, who did not hesitate to accuse us communists of deliberately and for purely propagandist purposes ascribing this role to fascism and of exaggerating the war danger. Some people did this consciously, in the interests of the ruling classes, while others did so out of their political short-sightedness. The past 2 years, however, have provided a sufficiently clear demonstration of the complete absurdity of such accusations. Now, both the friends and foes of peace are openly speaking of the menace of a new world war which has come upon us. And it would also be difficult to find serious-minded people who at all doubt that it is precisely the fascist governments that are foremost in the desire for war. In actual fact, war is already going on in various countries. For 1 year already, both the Italian and the German interventionists have been carrying on a war against the Spanish people before the eyes of the whole world. After having accomplished the seizure of Manchuria, the Japanese fascist militarists are now again attacking the Chinese people and are carrying on a new war in North China. Manchuria, Ethiopia, Spain, North China, these are stages toward the new great robber war of fascism. These are not isolated acts. There exists a bloc of fascist aggressors and warmongers, Berlin, Rome, Tokyo, the German-Japanese agreement, quote-unquote, against the Communist International, an agreement which, as is well known, is of a military nature, and to which Mussolini has in fact also linked himself, is already being applied in practice. Under the flag of struggle against the Communist International, against the so-called Red Menace, the German, Italian, and Japanese aggressors are trying by means of partial wars to seize military strategic positions, key positions on land and naval routes, and sources of raw materials for their war supplies, with a view to unleashing further imperialist war. There is no need to be under any illusions. There is no need to wait for a formal declaration of war to see that war is now on. As far back as March 1936, Comrade Stalin, in his interview with Roy Howard, in parentheses, head of Scripps Howard newspaper chain, said, "War may break out unexpectedly. Nowadays, wars are not declared, they simply begin." All events of recent years serve as a glaring confirmation of this thesis. Without officially declaring war, Japan opened military operations against China and seized Manchuria. Italy attacked the Ethiopian people and seized Ethiopia, and Germany and Italy are waging a war against the Spanish Republic. It is well known that the people have no desire for war, and that a number of non-fascist states are, in the present conditions, interested in maintaining peace. On what, then, do the fascist war makers base their calculations? The entire experience following the robber drive by the Japanese imperialists into Manchuria and by Italian fascism into Ethiopia shows unquestionably that the bandit bloc of the rulers of Germany, Japan, and Italy in order to carry out their military plans in practice, are striving first of all to hinder united action by the states interested in the maintenance of peace. Secondly, to prevent unity of action by the international labor movement, the establishment of a mighty united world front against fascism and war. Thirdly, to carry on undermining diversionist and espionage work in the Soviet Union, which is the most important buttress of peace. It is on this chiefly that the fascists base their calculations. And in actual fact, the fascist aggressors and warmongers are working strenuously and jointly in these three directions. They are blackmailing the Western European states by threatening their territorial interests. They are preparing an onslaught on the USSR. They are making extensive use of the toleration of the ruling circles of Britain, France, and the United States. While making proposals for an agreement on the plundering of the small countries, Spain and China, they are striving in every possible way to win the good graces of the British conservatives and a number of liberal and labor leaders, so as to win Britain away from France and other democratic countries. Holding out a similar lure, the fascists are exerting unbelievable efforts to come to an agreement with the French reactionaries in regard to French resignation from the Franco-Soviet Pact, thus isolating France from the Soviet Union. The fascist states left the League of Nations to get a free hand for their aggression. They terrorized the weak states by threatening attacks from outside and by organizing conspiracies and rebellions within these countries. The fascist warmongers make use of traitors, and particularly of the Trotskyists, to carry on disruptive, disorganizing work in the ranks of the labor movement to disrupt the People's Front in Spain and France. The recent putsch in Barcelona gave a particularly clear demonstration of how the fascists make use of Trotskyite organizations to stab the People's Front in the back. The fascists also make splendid use of the work of the opponents of international proletarian unity in the ranks of the Second International and the International Federation of Trade Unions, and assiduously recruit their agents everywhere. But as was disclosed at the recent trials of Trotskyists and spies, the fascist aggressors have put forth special efforts to send Trotskyist agents into the great land of socialist victories to carry on disruptive work there. The fascists calculated that if they succeeded in undermining the power of the Soviet Union, the most loyal guardian of peace, then the success of their military plans of aggression would in the main be assured. Hence, one can understand the furious howl set up by the fascists and their tools at the merciless wiping out of the traitors to the great land of socialism by the organs of the dictatorship of the working class, supported by the entire Soviet people. The exposure and wiping out of the fascist agents, terrorist wreckers and spies in the land of socialism strengthen its economic, political and military might, break up the sinister plans of the fascist scoundrels, and thereby help to strengthen peace. This has been the most powerful and crushing blow dealt to the warmongers in recent times. It is an exceptionally important contribution to the struggle to maintain peace throughout the world. On more than one occasion, the Soviet Union has upset the war plans of the fascist aggressors by its consistent and resolute peace policy. It can be asserted without any exaggeration that mankind would long ago have been hurled into the most terrible war in history had not the Soviet Union been insistent and unswerving in carrying through its peace policy, had there been no glorious Red Army in existence. But while the fascist aggressors meet with necessary rebuffs from the Soviet Union, which is acting in the interests not only of the Soviet people, but also of the whole of toiling mankind, this cannot be said of the countries of bourgeois democracy. Here, as is being demonstrated with particular clearness by the examples of Spain and China, we meet with the overt and concealed assistance being given to the fascist bloc by the ruling circles of the most important Western non-fascist states. Was it not support for the fascists when the seizure of Manchuria by the Japanese militarists was met with toleration? Was not the lack of resolute resistance to the bloody campaign of Mussolini against the people of Ethiopia encouragement to the fascist aggressors? Take the entire farce of non-intervention in Spanish affairs, which has already been carried on for a year under the leadership of the British government, and the negotiations going on regarding the recognition of Franco as a belligerent. Are they not, in fact, an encouragement to the war being waged by the fascist states against the Spanish Republic? Is not the present complacent attitude toward the brazen marauders in North China the most scandalous encouragement to the unbridled Japanese militarists who wish to enslave the great Chinese people? How can the peoples of Great Britain, France, the United States, and the people of other non-fascist countries look on calmly at these things? How can they put up with this systematic toleration and encouragement of fascist aggression, which facilitates the foul work of the fascist firebrands of a new world war? In the face of these things, it becomes still clearer how great is the historic responsibility which lies on those circles and leaders of the Labour and Socialist International and the International Federation of Trade Unions, which are stubbornly resisting the establishment of united action by the international proletariat, of action by its organization on the basis of a united, agreed-upon policy against the fascist war makers, of the establishment of a mighty international front of peace. When the Japanese militarists seized Manchuria, there were people claiming to be leading lights in the labor movement who assured the workers in their organizations that Manchuria was a long way off and the Japanese invasion did not touch on the interests of the international labor movement. When Mussolini's fascist hordes crushed the Ethiopian people, these individuals asserted that the events in Ethiopia were a local colonial conflict and that the international proletariat ought not to interfere. When later on the fascist aggressors brazenly attacked the Spanish Republic and began a war within Europe itself, it was only after many months of tormenting vacillations that the leaders of the Second International agreed to a joint conference with the delegation of the Communist International at Annemasse, and yet not for the purpose of actually bringing about united action between the international workers' organizations, but only to recognize the advisability of joint action, quote-unquote, where it is possible. Since then, the fascist intervention in Spain has been considerably intensified, and now there has been added the new aggression of the Japanese militarists in North China, which, according to Japanese plans, is to become a second Manchukuo and the basis for a further seizure of China. Is it not clear that at this moment, when the Spanish people are exerting all their efforts to beat off the onslaught of the fascist interventionists, when the Chinese people are rising up against the Japanese militarists who have attacked them, the international workers' organizations should at least unite their efforts and come to the defense of international peace, resolutely and fully prepared for action. The situation is now developing in such a way that to maintain peace throughout the world means first and foremost to bring about the defeat of the fascist invaders of Spain and China. They must be taught a good lesson. They must be really made to feel that the international proletariat and all progressive and civilized mankind will not tolerate their military aggression and acts of robbery, and are ready to do everything to prevent them from fulfilling their plans of igniting the flames of a new world war. Can it be that the Labour and Socialist International and the International Federation of Trade Unions will rest content now with general wordy declarations and incantations in favor of peace, while in deeds they shun joint action by all organizations of the international labor movement, which is so vitally needed? Surely it is clear that joint action by the international workers' organizations in each separate country and on an international scale is alone capable of mobilizing the forces of progressive mankind for a struggle against war, to bar the road to the warmongers, and also to exert pressure on the official policy of the most important non-fascist states to curb the fascist aggressors who have thrown off all restraint. It is impossible to carry on a serious struggle for the maintenance of international peace unless, first and foremost, all necessary steps are taken to establish a united front of the working class in each country and united action by the international workers' organizations. It is impossible to carry on a serious fight for peace unless the forces of the labor movement and of the wide masses of the people are mobilized to drive the fascist usurpers out of Spain and China as rapidly as possible. The relation between the forces of war and the forces of peace is not what it was in 1914. Tremendous world historical changes have taken place since that time. The imperialists succeeded in casting millions of people into the inferno of a world slaughter when circumstances were such that neither a powerful proletarian state nor its Red Army existed, when there was no People's Front in France and Spain, when the Chinese people were not in a position to defend their national independence, when the masses of the people had not had the experience of the imperialist war and the great proletarian revolution, when the international working class did not as yet possess such a world organization as the Communist International, the international labor movement has sufficient forces and means at its disposal to bring about the cessation of the intervention of German and Italian fascism in Spain, the onslaught of the Japanese militarists in China, and to secure international peace. This, however, requires that the tremendous forces and means at the disposal of the international labor movement be united and directed toward an effective and unyielding struggle against fascism and war. August 1937.